Welcome to everyone joining. We're just taking a few seconds to let everyone filter into the webinar. So give us a few seconds here and we'll start in just a moment. Welcome to everyone joining. We're just taking a, need to hear me talking. Welcome everybody. All right, I'm going to kick us off this morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you may be joining us in the world today. My name is Cole Simcoe. I am a senior communications employee here at Making Sense International. Also here on behalf of Youth Power 2, or YP2LE as we refer to it. I'm super excited to welcome everybody to the webinar this morning, Designing Better Youth Center and Safe Spaces Programming, which is the launch event for our Youth Centers Toolkit. Before again, I just want to mention a couple of things to everyone joining us on the webinar today. One, we will be using the chat, so please do feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, ask any questions. You can also directly message me, or as I see a couple of people have their hands raised, I can then message you directly if you need any kind of tech support. Please do feel free to reach out to me. We will be doing a couple of polls and asking for some Q&A, which we'll be conducting in the chat. So please do keep that open and keep an eye on that for all of the links and questions that will be shared there. And with that, I would like to turn it over and introduce my colleague Maria Brindelmeyer, who will give us a brief overview for anyone who's new to the YP2LE Learning Network. Maria?
Thank you, Cole. Yes, I'm Maria Brindelmeyer. I'm the Senior Knowledge Management Specialist on Youth Power 2 Learning and Evaluation. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar in our Learning Network webinar series. We're super excited about today's topic. We think it's one of the topics that are of so much interest both to youth serving organizations as well as youth themselves. So just a quick introduction to Youth Power 2 Learning and Evaluation, which is a USAID funded activity that is based on positive youth development. And so positive youth development, as we define it, is an approach that recognizes and supports youth rights to have assets such as skills, or financial assets, to have the ability to leverage those assets through agency. And we also want to contribute to youth being able to kind of contribute to their own positive change, and to do all of this in an enabling environment. We are really very focused on that enabling environment. And I think some the activities that you'll hear today will also focus on that. So that's kind of just a quick introduction to positive youth development. Youth Power 2 Learning and Evaluation is focused on achieving sustainable systems change. We know that there are lots of programs out there, and our program is focused on translating lots of learnings and experiences that we gather through knowledge sharing, through stakeholder engagement, and through the application of learning to the more long-term sustainable system change. The program activities include the Learning Network as one of our components, and then we also have communities of practice. We hope that you will join some of those. They are on our website, youthpower.org, and I think at the end of this webinar, you'll hear a little bit more about that. So this just let me conclude that short introduction. And we will start with a brief video. One of the key features of successful positive youth development is safe spaces. They serve as a hub in marginalized communities for delivering other positive youth development features. And so we will have this short video, thanks to our colleagues from Creative, to highlight the impact of these models in communities. Cole, over to you.
Thanks, Maria. I'm just going to go ahead and start the video for us. Thanks.
En la región centroamericana, miles de jóvenes son impulsados cada día a involucrarse en ilícitos o pandillas. Pero desde hace 6 años, una puerta de oportunidades y esperanza ha sido abierta para los jóvenes de la región centroamericana. Estos son los centros de alcance por mi barrio, ubicados en el corazón de las comunidades más golpeadas por la violencia juvenil y la presencia de pandillas. Se convierten en una puerta de oportunidades para construir sus sueños y sus planes de vida de un modo diferente. Los centros de alcance por mi barrio, o CDAs, cuentan con 6 componentes. Uso creativo del tiempo libre. Todos los jóvenes que acuden a un CDA tienen la oportunidad de ocupar su tiempo libre en acciones positivas como divertirse tocando un instrumento, compartir con sus amigos en los juegos de mesa, jugar ping-pong, ejercitarse en un gimnasio o jugar PlayStation frente a una pantalla plana. Un segundo componente es la capacitación para el trabajo. Este ofrece la posibilidad a los jóvenes de aprender algún oficio, desarrollarse alguna habilidad o destreza para que puedan serles útiles al momento de trabajar. En un CDA, los jóvenes aprenden inglés y computación. Pueden aprender también serigrafía, panadería, manualidades, entre otras. Estas capacitaciones son otorgadas por convenios firmados con centros de estudios superiores o escuelas técnicas, o entregadas también por vecinos dispuestos a compartir su conocimiento con los jóvenes. Refuerzo escolar y homologación educativa. Apoyando a los beneficiarios que asisten a la escuela, en el CDA cuentan con los recursos y el apoyo para que allí realicen sus tareas escolares o repasen sus lecciones. Esto les permite mantener o mejorar su rendimiento en la escuela y entusiasmarse con el estudio, y así reducir cualquier intención de abandonar su formación escolar. La homologación, por su parte, es volver a estudiar o empezar a estudiar si nunca lo hiciste. Gestión de oportunidades. Es abrir a los jóvenes la posibilidad de accesar a becas, pasantías, habilitación laboral, acceso al empleo, entre otros. Estos beneficios son para aquellos beneficiarios de la edad laboral. El desafío de soñar mi vida. Esta es la filosofía de los centros de alcance. Este esfuerzo supone que cada joven defina sus metas y proyecte su alcance en el tiempo, contando con un mentor que lo guíe en el desarrollo de los pasos a seguir para el cumplimiento de sus sueños. Voluntariado. Los voluntarios se vuelven la columna de los CDA, ya que son ellos los que dan apoyo al coordinador y a todos los beneficiarios. Los centros de alcance por mi barrio se han convertido en una experiencia exitosa en prevención de violencia en la región. Además, los centros de alcance son una respuesta y una nueva alternativa para que los jóvenes de Centroamérica construyan un mejor futuro lejos de la violencia. Así que ya lo sabes, conoce y visita un centro de alcance por mi barrio y conviértelo en tu segunda casa. En la región centroamericana.
Perfect. And thank you so much for that video. Now I would like to turn things over to our colleague, Mike McCabe. He's the Agency Senior Youth Advisor for USAID. Mike will be kind of guiding us through the introduction to this toolkit and some of the discussion with our colleagues that have joined us today. So Mike, welcome.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everybody. Good afternoon, good morning to some of you. We're really glad to have you all part of this discussion and launch of our new online toolkit for setting up youth centers, after-school programs, and safe spaces for young people. Everywhere I have the opportunity to travel around the world, young people often, the top 2 things they are asking and looking for, one is opportunities that get them into jobs and income. And the second one is often a safe space and a youth space in their community. And so it is, as Maria said, one of those 7 key features that we know are part of that evidence-based model of positive youth development that USAID, the US government, and now around the world organizations have been using as their philosophy and their approach to effective youth programming. And I want to start off, first of all, with a lot of thanks both to our panelists today. We've got some of the outstanding people who have been in this movement of creating safe spaces and youth centers over decades. I also want to thank the people who pulled together this toolkit, and it's truly an example of collective impact. It is drawn from examples of youth centers and organizations on all continents that touch on different aspects of effective after-school programs and youth centers and safe spaces. I also want to thank those who helped contribute to actually design and develop the toolkit, Isaiah Senes and Katie Green and Maria Brindlemeyer, the Youth Power 2 Learning and Evaluation team, and all the partners who contributed to it, but mainly to those who every day are on the front line helping run and organize youth centers. We want to start, first of all, is asking each of you to think about a question. So if you go to the poll that is coming up here, and you should see it in, I think, Cole, yep, there it is right there. Did you participate or benefit as a young person from a youth center or safe space program? Please click in the poll right now if you participated or benefited from a youth center program. And the reason I bring that up, and Cole, if you wouldn't mind going back one slide, on the slide thing, there we go. The pictures at the opening there, one of the big takeaways that we got from developing this online toolkit was that it's not about the hardware, it's about the software. And what we mean by that is the picture on the left there is in Bor, South Sudan. And that is a youth center program off to the left that was run out of a tent in a displaced persons camp in Bor in South Sudan. And every day they ran programming as a youth center, and those people you see in the picture helped run that program. On the right is a picture of a youth center that I had the privilege of working as part of a USAID program in Panama, where we set up 22 youth centers in gang-impacted communities. And the young person there is typical of the journey of some young people, where he had unfortunately grown up in an abusive household and then ended up joining a gang and kind of traveling around between communities looking for a new sense of purpose. And when he found Pastor Manuel, who you see in that picture, he found a new opportunity to get back engaged in school, to learn a new trade, to be part of a youth against violence movement. And that helped him transform his life. And both he and Pastor Manuel talk about why having a safe space in that community as an anchor for young people to come together was transformative for giving him that second chance in his life. As we can see here, there's a lot of people who didn't have a chance to have a safe space or a youth program in their community when they were growing up, about 2/3, and about 1/3 did. Our vision and our goal is that every young person should have access to a safe space in the non-school hours. And that could take a lot of different forms, whether it's in a school-based setting like we'll hear about with Glasswing, or a community-based setting, even when it's in a conflict-impacted community like we'll hear from Harold, or in other environments that serve a broader area like we'll hear from Doug from UN Habitat. So our agenda today, we're going to quickly go through the toolkit. This is a fabulous toolkit. It draws the best open source examples of resources that you can draw upon for curriculum, for tools and sheets to help you in designing your new youth center, in managing the youth center, in scaling and sustaining your youth center. And then we'll go into some examples from around the world and then open it up for you for questions. I ask that at any time, feel free to drop your questions into the chat box, because that's going to be really key for in our Q&A part, that we take advantage of the thoughts that you have. We'll also be dropping in links to the toolkit, and we'd ask you today, share that out broadly. Encourage those who are in your network, whether they're government officials or nonprofits or other donor partners, share that toolkit out to explore that, and think about how in your community or country you could have a dialogue about how you can draw upon that. So let's jump into the toolkit now here. And so let's see. Oh, first, I'm sorry, my apologies. We're going to go into one more video that you there. Let's see. All right, there we go. All right, the slide is up. Sorry about that. So let's first jump into what is in the toolkit that you see there. So in the very opening of it, what you're going to find is you can go in and we've got a evidence section looking at what is the evidence behind it. So let me give you an example. In the 22 communities where youth centers were set up in Panama between 2010 and 2013, what we saw was a change in the level of safety in the community. Perception of safety went from 38% in these gang impacted communities to 62%. And it was in a controlled study against other communities. So it had a dramatic impact in creating a sense of safety in those communities where that is. So in the evidence section, you'll be able to see a lot about kind of what's exactly the evidence there that can support you. And we also obviously have a lot of other information related to what impacts it has on psychological and physical safety, what it has in terms of supportive relationships, opportunities for belonging. And this all links over also to some of the M&E and learning components. The next section of it looks at the types of youth centers and what do we know about these different models. And as I said, there's a lot of different types of models we'll hear about today. Some of them take advantage of that school infrastructure and they do it in the safe space of the school, but in the non-school hours. And the benefit of that is that you have, a space that is well set up. Sometimes teachers serve as the volunteers in those non-school hours, and it links into curricular activities at times. Then we have the other component, which are more safe spaces and empowerment programs in the community. So it could be, like we know in Africa, there's the ELA program or Balika, which are girls' safe empowerment circles, or it could be actual centers that we've talked about. Then we get down into the implementation section of the online toolkit. And in here, this is where you could click down through. These are just a few of the resources you can find. So the Urban Youth Center Setup Guide by UN Habitat, Doug will talk a little bit more about it. This is a whole setup guide that helps you walk through it. Or at youth.gov, which is our US government platform for young people, we have an entire curriculum there for starting and operating after school programs that you can access through this. The Management and Operations of Outreach Centers Guide by Creative Associates is also in there. And you can go in, and again, it walks you through everything from thinking about where do we put a youth center in our community in partnership between youth and the municipality and maybe faith-based organizations and other CBOs that are in the community. Then how do we run it? How do we recruit volunteers? So let's go down to the next section there. Cole, if you go down one more to scale. All right, so under scale, what we've got is a whole series of different experiences about how we put together what I call the 4 legs of the table for sustaining and scaling youth center models. So part of that is what are we doing and how do we approach local government support, whether that's in kind or human resources or subsidies that will underwrite some of these. And we've got models of that. How do we mobilize volunteers and more importantly, effective management of volunteers for youth centers? How have we seen some really good models of the private sector being engaged? And because private sectors see youth centers in a key way, they see them as an opportunity for up and coming employees for their companies that may be co-located in nearby communities. And then finally, how do we develop social enterprises? So you might have seen in that video at the beginning, there was a gym that was part of a youth center. So that's actually generating income for those youth centers to help sustain some of the costs, as are some of the info cafes that are tied to them. So these are all just different examples of some of those components that are in that. Then the next section of it is, if we could go one more, Cole, on M&E. The big question is, do these work? What are we trying to achieve through this? So what we've done is we've created links to a lot of different of the best examples of how do we measure after school youth outcomes or youth center outcomes and programming. We also have the Positive Youth Development Measurement Toolkit tied in there, as well as how do we measure soft skills effectively. So all of these are open source resources that you can find as you're putting together your new youth center or trying to strengthen the components. Can you go one more there, Cole? So one of the best useful parts of this entire downloadable toolkit or the online version is you can go in and you can look at the resources for existing curricula. So there are resource sections that will walk you through the open curriculum that we've gathered from across the world on education, girls' empowerment, advocacy, and civic engagement. And you can use these curriculums in your centers. Go down one more, please. It also has checklists on how you staff, checklists for common things that you would want to have in your center. So if you're putting together a budget because you want to create a center or a set of centers, what do you need to know for that? Clear rules and expectations for how it's done. We also have checklists on the actual indicators that a number of them use. What we're going to do right now is I'm going to open up my screen to just show you. Let's make sure this works. Share screen. Yes. And here, let's see if this works. If it doesn't, we will go back to the other way. So if you look here, this is the actual downloadable toolkit. Cole, can you confirm that you can see that? All right. So when you go down through it, the whole toolkit is downloadable as well as searchable online. But when you get down toward the appendixes at the end, what you'll see here, and I'll try and go a little bit slower, you've got resources which are operational resources, how to identify objectives, how to do operations planning. So we've organized the toolkit. So depending on where you are in developing your youth center program, you've got the best practice tools for each of the sections of it. Operational planning, how to do research studies, the objectives, how to do staff training, the resource mobilization components, and on for that section. Then down in the next section below it, we've got all the curricula broken out by education curricula, by girls' empowerment curricula, leadership, vocational training, health, and designing curriculum. And then we have a whole section, thanks to many of you who submitted your best practice example of youth centers. And you can hyperlink and take a look at some of those youth centers along the way. So this gives you just a general sense of what's in this toolkit. It has been a labor of love between lots of organizations that care about making sure that every young person has a safe space. I'm gonna stop sharing right now. And what we'd like to do right now is share one more video with you. And then we're gonna go and have a conversation with some of our great experts today. So Cole, if you wouldn't mind sharing one more video telling the story of a different network of youth centers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike.
Esta es la escuela donde estudié toda mi vida, desde primer grado hasta bachillerato. Hoy la veo con nostalgia porque recuerdo todo lo que aprendí, cómo me ayudó a ser la persona que soy ahora. Veo estos salones y me veo a mí misma ahí recibiendo clubes que me ayudaron a ser quien soy. Mi nombre es Stephanie, tengo 21 años y soy de El Salvador. Recuerdo que fue en el año 2011 donde inició el programa de escuelas comunitarias. Fui parte del club líder, club de debate y del club de liderazgo. Después hice voluntariado como estudiante líder. El programa de escuelas comunitarias nos brinda oportunidades para que nosotros los jóvenes adquiramos nuevas habilidades y la escuela se convierte en un espacio más seguro y más comprensivo y de apoyo. Cuando fui parte de él, me abrió la mente, me enseñó a luchar por mis metas y a soñar. La primera experiencia que como estudiantes vivimos en las escuelas comunitarias son los clubes. Desde ahí empieza a cambiar todo. Vivimos talleres, capacitaciones, salidas y conocimos a personas que nos inspiran y nos motivan a ser la mejor versión de nosotros mismos. Ahora que soy ex estudiante me doy cuenta que con cada una de las experiencias estamos recibiendo algo más importante, un lugar seguro. Cada taller, club o salida recibimos apoyo, confianza e inspiración. Hoy, 5 años después, comprendo que más allá de las habilidades de canto y baile o debate que aprendí la capacidad de superar obstáculos y de ser resiliente. Otro de los aspectos más importantes que vivimos mis compañeros y yo fue contar con modelos positivos a seguir. Antes que el programa llegara a la escuela, tenía compañeros que andaban en malos pasos. Después empezamos a ir a los clubes y empezamos a verlo como nuestro lugar seguro, como nuestro segundo hogar. porque sentíamos que nos protegían, nos daban consejos y nos enseñaban a visualizar un futuro diferente con metas profesionales y personales. Hoy puedo asegurar que el programa de escuelas comunitarias fue una de las mejores cosas que me pudo haber pasado en mi vida, no solo por todas las habilidades y personas increíbles que conocí, sino por todo el apoyo que me han dado mi comunidad. Lo mejor de todo era que me enseñaron que sí es posible lograr un futuro diferente. Esto me ha ayudado a desenvolverme en la universidad y el trabajo y creo que me servirá para toda mi vida. En la actualidad estudio 5º año de licenciatura en Contaduría Pública y trabajo en el área. Ni yo me lo creo. Antes de todo este programa, los sueños de los jóvenes acá era trabajar como meseros y las niñas de mi edad se convertían en mamás jóvenes. Hoy pensamos en ser profesionales. Sin duda agradezco a cada club, cada taller y cada salida extracurricular, pero lo que más agradezco son las pláticas, los consejos y la habilidad de estar ahí y ser ese sentido de comunidad que anhelaba.
What an awesome testimony from her and the work that Glasswing does. I want to present now our three experts for the day to talk a little bit about what they've learned over their work on youth centers and different models. And I want to start with Celina De Sola, who is the co-founder and vice president of programs at Glasswing. We'll also be hearing from Doug Reagan, who is the program management officer for the Human Rights and Social Inclusion Unit at UN Habitat. And then finally with Harold Cibaja, who's the Latin America Regional Director at Creative Associates International. Celina, can you start us off and maybe just give us a little bit more context for why Glasswing focused on school-based youth centers, a little bit what's the model and how you've grown that model?
Sure, thank you, Mike. Thanks, I was gonna ask for the slides. So like you heard Stephanie, really for us, when we started the organization 14 years ago, we realized that kids didn't really have, particularly in communities that faced a lot of stigma and adversity, they didn't really have a place to go where they could feel safe and get together with peers, right? And have fun, really. And in the process, learn the key skills that we all are really familiar with and then develop these positive relationships with caring adults, which we know are really key to positive youth development. And I think that with that vision, we were trying to figure out what the best way would be to do this that wouldn't require so many resources that we wouldn't be able to do it. We were just starting as an organization. So we looked at what other people were doing. We looked at models, what works, what doesn't. This is about 14 years ago. And what we realized is that schools are sometimes, aside from being a school, they're also this incredible latent resource in communities. In Central America, kids are only in school for 4 hours a day, more or less. So in the middle of the day, between the two shifts, they were empty. So that's when we decided to leverage that infrastructure, existing infrastructure, and basically try to transform public schools into centers of community. And because kids and families know where the school is, for the most part, they're safe spaces. And we decided, okay, what can we do? Talking to students, talking to teachers, talking to parents, what can we do that'll be interesting to young people and also develop the skills that they need to thrive, essentially. So what this translates into, and you can read this on the slide, it has different components. It has the after school programs, which are on average, each program is about 2 hours a week. It's led by trained volunteers. And we also have the guidance and support. And then we work a lot with the community to engage the community in activities. And that means students, former students, and other members of the community. I think earlier, Maria talked about this focus of agency, assets, enabling environment, and contribution. And in our case, we're working now, we've scaled this model to 10 countries. And what we've seen is that leveraging these existing infrastructure, these existing spaces that not only have the physical space, like you said, it's not just the hardware, it's a software, and providing activities that really respond to the interests of kids, we're able to really transform the context and the pride and the sense of belonging, hope, aspirational thinking, and all these things that we know are so important. At the end of the day, to conclude, I think, Mike, it's a lot about a commitment to long-term goals, to maintaining these lasting relationships in communities, to being flexible, and to also being committed to learning, right? Like I think, you know, when you want a skill, you want to have the evidence, and we want to have the evidence locally that this works. So a lot of it's also involved iterating along the way, and it's been a huge learning curve. So I think for us, that's in super summary what the community schools model represents.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. So the and one thing that really stands out to me about the Glasswing model is you know, how you've developed the curriculum for the STEM, the arts and culture, transformational leadership components, is curriculum that your volunteers can come in and deliver on a regular basis. And one of the big challenges of youth centers is getting that regular flow of volunteers to work with the young people who are in those safe spaces. We're going to switch over to Nairobi right now and hear from Doug. And Doug, can you walk us through a little bit the model of the one-stop resource center that UN Habitat's been developing?
Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, honored to, and thank you very much for this. I think this is this symposium is really important because youth centers to us are critical, and it's been this way for us for over a decade. So we have what we call the One-Stop Youth Resource Center model. We do work with positive youth development. We also work with asset-based community development. What our philosophy is that there is always something positive in a young person's life and in a community's life. And this is often hard to see, especially if you're working as we do in informal settlements. Our mandate as a UN agency is the unique mandate within the UN system to work with cities and towns. And so we have 1 billion people in informal settlements globally. The vast majority of those are actually young people, probably upwards of 70%. We're talking young people working on $5 or making $5 a day, oftentimes to support a full family. So what we've worked with is trying to develop a model that really kind of allows the assets of young people, the positive aspects of young people, and to build on those. So, I mean, I'll go through a few pieces. I mean, I really like the last presentation and the idea of using underused schools. We also do not believe in building from the ground up. It's intensely challenging to do in cities. There's lots of issues of corruption. If you've heard anything around land and land use and cadasters and all these kind of things, you know that most people don't even own their land. So what is most important for us is to get a structure up that reflects the abilities of the community. Oftentimes not beautiful. Oftentimes that's just functional. But it's when we're looking, for example, in our one of our centers in Mathare, which is the second largest informal settlement in Kenya. What we see is this, you know, this place that young people have built. They built it over the last actually 15 years to reflect the needs of their community. And so then what we believe in another philosophy, or I guess you call it theory, that we hold is what we call youth-led development, is really looking at young people taking leadership. And not just as an aspirational thing to look at as, oh, we're training them as leaders, but actually recognizing that young people, especially in the hugely youthful communities we live in, they have to be leaders. If 70% of your population is under the age of 30, you have no choice but to make sure that young people become leaders, and beyond no choice, that's what they're doing. So we really need to recognize them. So we do a lot of leadership training. We're honestly oftentimes less concerned about what they do and more concerned about what we get to, because what they want and what they need is often, it will be totally reflected in their focus. So, for example, obviously livelihoods are a critical part, and we have here a photo of one of the more outstanding centers we have in Kimisagara in Kigali, Rwanda. It's amazing center, and it does training such as this. This is sewing, but then they have an ICT center, they have a health center, they have a recreational spaces like football pitches and such. And so this has been reflected over almost a decade of what the young people there want. Another key component we think of and that we focus on is the sustainability, and where we've put a lot of our focus is on local government, because that's it's our mandate, but as well, we believe local government is always going to be there. There will always be governance at a local level. And they're often, that local government is often the first place that young people come into contact with. They deliver the basic services, sometimes not really the sexy stuff, but, you know, picking up the garbage and the trash, or making sure water and sanitation happen. So they're kind of the first point of contact for most young people in terms of government. But they also, for us, are a critical partner because they also have assets. They bring land. Most local governments have access to land. And they're the ones that come on board, and they're the ones that have made our centers sustainable. So our first center was established in the Central Business District of Nairobi, and that was in 2003. It's basically run self-sufficiently, which is also something as well. I mean, I'm very realistic. I come from an NGO background. I'm very realistic about what the UN can do. We can't be an NGO. We're not efficient enough. We're far too expensive, to be honest. But we're really looking for sustainability, and that's what we see in working with local government and allowing local government. The last piece as well, I want two more pieces. One is to say that informal settlements have been a focus, but the other focus for us has been in conflict cities. So we have three of our current centers that have just been established. One is in Juba, one's in Kismayo and in Somalia, and the other one's in Mogadishu. Again, these are another places that you sometimes go there. If you've ever been to Mogadishu and been able to get outside the wire, you'll see complete devastation. Yet young people are able to move forward. Young people are able to build on those assets. So we've really focused in the last while on these areas. And lastly, the final point is, and as I mentioned here in the slide, is COVID-19 has been a major issue, especially for young people in informal settlements. We were approached in February and early March, with the concerns of the community saying, we just don't know if we can do anything. We're really afraid. And yet we worked with them. We established a network and a coalition of youth-led groups across Kenya. Then we moved to Ecuador and Somalia. Looking at what they could do, we established initially hand washing stations. We got up to about 95 in different places. By August, in International Youth Day, August 12th, we've done 2.5 million hand washes through those stations, all run by young people, pretty much volunteer. And they've morphed into providing recreation because the children are in school, providing other services, prevention information. So this also for us was kind of a proof of concept that young people are not only receivers of knowledge and receivers of training, but they're also able to provide the services in their community. Anyway, so yeah, I'm really excited to talk more and find out more what people are doing. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. That's excellent. Harold, can you talk? You've been doing this for well over a decade, almost 16 years since you started setting up the first safe space models in gang-impacted communities of Guatemala. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned and what the model is that Creative has been supporting communities with?
Sure. Thank you, Michael, for inviting, and congratulations on the launching of the Toolkit. And great tool. Yeah, the outreach centers have been establishing the outreach centers have been a journey. We started in 2006 in Guatemala in 3 communities. And we started basically trying to find solutions for the increasing crime and the issue of gangs in these communities. We established an alliance with faith-based organizations. We saw them working in the communities, trying to rescue some of the kids from gangs, and we thought these are great partners. You know, we started with a Catholic church, one outreach center, and 2 others with evangelical churches. Assuming we're just going to pay for the equipment, establish the centers, and asking these religious leaders to pay for the housing of the outreach centers and pay for the salary of the coordinator. We call them For My Neighborhood outreach centers. And this is because we went to knock at the doors of the neighbors and saying, do you want to volunteer for your youth? Do you know how to play the guitar? Can you just teach kids how to play the guitar? You know how to bake? Could you just do the same for kids of your community? And so this was an effort just that started with faith-based organizations and volunteers from the communities. It was a major success. You know, we established 3 and it started growing. Today, there are almost 300 outreach centers in the region, starting in 2006 in Guatemala, then 2008 in El Salvador, moved to 2009 in Honduras, and 2010 in Panama. And you were part of that, Michael. Outreach centers, the beauty of the outreach centers is that they're a safe space for youth. And we came trying to reduce risk factors. Many of these youth coming to this center, they have suffered domestic violence. They don't believe in themselves. They don't have any goals for the future. And those are some of the risk factors that drive youth into gangs. Many of them are dropouts, and some of them just don't have any opportunities, and they admire the gangs because they have the money, they have the power in those communities. So they were lacking role models. So what we try to create with the outreach centers was getting a coordinator from the same community, somebody who would just believe in the youth and will push them to be the best for themselves. So the centers offer computer labs, music and art rooms, different courses, basic skills, tutoring programs, which is great. Just kids can come and just do their homework, and that helps them with passing grades, sports activities, and gyms, and in some cases, income generation opportunities. The beauty of the outreach centers, is that they promote a sense of community and identity for youth. It's a safe space. Not necessarily you get certifications in terms of the courses. It's not a vocational center, but you can share with friends in a very positive environment. What's the beauty of these centers and why there's so many already, has been a commitment of USAID from different projects, about five different projects in the region, and the center the model has been evolving, and Creative Associates started since the very beginning with the first one. And right now there are, I think, about 280, 290 outreach centers that have been established in the region. And this is possible just because it's an effort, a partnership that started with faith-based organizations, but they were not able actually to just cover the expenses of the center. So we had to involve the municipalities. And so they're probably right now, like at least in El Salvador, the 23 mayors supporting outreach centers, and they have to pay for the house and the salary of the coordinator, which makes it a $7,000, $8,000 a year expense. So one mayor is supporting 7 centers, so they're supporting 5. So the wealth and the expenses are shared. And also the community-based organizations and faith-based organizations, they bring the volunteers, they pay for the internet, they pay for the utilities, and that's a coordinated effort. USAID pays for the equipment. It's $25,000. Each center. That's basically what it costs. But it's a one-time deal. We equip the centers and creative, with very committed personnel. Just did the monitoring, transfer the model, providing different tools of the challenge of dreaming my life, so youth can really kind of develop their goals, their plans, and they're supported by mentors to help them achieve those goals. So it's been an experience that has involved many partners, from municipalities, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and the backbone of the centers, which are the volunteers. And many of these centers, they offer what the volunteers can offer. You go to some centers, they're doing breakdance. Others are even offering Japanese classes. And how, because just one of the outreach centers coordinator had came from Japan, was offering Japanese. So it's all of them keep the same vision, same brand, but they evolve based on the skills of the community, and they belong to the community. Another important thing to say is that all these centers have computers, flat screens, and nobody they are not robbed by any violence in the community. Even the gangs respect the outreach centers, and that's a beauty. And I just leave it like this, just we'll expand later in the Q&A
Thank you so much,
section.
Harold. That's great. So looking at some of the questions coming in, thank you for putting those questions in. Ferris asked, where do I start if I wanted to now take action? And Maria mentioned, if you go into the toolkit on page 10, there's a whole section to help you think about how you get started. But Selena, can you talk a little bit about how you get the content right? So I was saying that, it's not about the hardware, and Doug really drove this home. The hardware being that you need to have a big, expensive space. That space can be anywhere, and it could move if you need to. In some communities, it has to move. But it's getting the programming and the activities right that young people want to come together around. So Selena, if you wouldn't mind starting with just how you get the programming right.
This is going to sound like it's pointing out the obvious, but sometimes I think it's not in terms of programming. I think we all look at the evidence globally. We look at what's important to develop social and emotional skills, but we can't just be evidence-based. We have to be youth-centered. And again, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I just want to underscore that I think constantly remembering who we're really accountable, and that's the participants of the program, is really important. So to get input on the curricular content on whatever we're doing, both Harold and Doug mentioned this, and just making sure that the content that we're delivering is actually interesting to the people that we're working with, and depending on their ages, genders. Someone just asked about, Harold, about whether it's mixed boys and girls. All of that is really important, and the answers to those questions largely come from the young people we work with. We've even had students interview staff before we hire them to see who they resonate with. So I think the programming does have to be very youth-centered and diverse. I think young people, if we remember how we were when we were teenagers, it has to be diverse and mix things up, because not everybody's going to be interested in sports or computers. Not everybody's going to want to learn English. So I think that's one of the most important things. And then just also ongoing training of staff and volunteers on restorative practices, on how to engage and maintain strong relationships with youth, especially volunteers. The more we train volunteers, the more we keep them also engaged. And I think that is just as valuable as the actual curricular content, which we can get from tools like this one, right? Like this tool is a perfect example of where we can get content, but content's no good if it doesn't respond to the interests of participants and kids themselves.
Yep. And one of the things that we found when I was working with youth centers in Panama is, if possible, develop your curriculum to be modular, which allows, if you have volunteers that maybe are only coming the first few days of the week and other volunteers coming the other days of the week, so that they can be delivering that curriculum with the young people, picking up from one volunteer to the next. So really understand, and you'll see that in some of the curriculum that is linked in the toolkit of how do you have that modular. Back to Harold for a second. Going to Ferris's question, if I were to start a youth center, what would be my first step that I should be thinking of doing? Harold, where does someone start if they want to get a youth center in their community?
Well, the basic, you need the funding. You need the funding actually to just get the equipment. Right now, what we included in your toolkit, is the manual actually how to start up a center. It has the values of the outreach center. It has the type of volunteers you need, the responsibilities of the coordinator, and the risk factors we're trying to reduce, the different components. So it'd be like a manual to franchise, actually, the outreach centers. Everything is there. Of course, you need the funding. You need those $25,000 actually to purchase all the equipment and some of the materials, and just talking computers, music instruments, desks, certain things, and the commitment from municipality, church, a donor actually to support the salary of the coordinator. And that's, in a way, the beauty of the outreach centers. It's just one person, one paid staff, and that makes them sustainable and subsisting, and persisting over time. And not, as Doug was saying, UN and not a single donor, can't be supporting outreach centers forever. So, and the fact that, it's their responsibility has been shared with others makes them a very sustainable and scalable type of operation. But I would say, just get the funding. You have the manual there. And of course, we'll be happy to support anyone who has questions or any needs in terms of starting an outreach center.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and as was mentioned before, bringing together those that could be volunteers from that neighborhood and community, from local universities, the municipality, private sector that may have operations in that community, and then any other donors that you could find, and bringing those together along with the young leaders in the community into dialogue about why there's that desire and what benefit it'll bring and how each can bring their resources to it is a really good starting point. I want to go to Doug for a second, and Elizabeth Dowling from Tufts University, who's doing amazing research up there on positive youth development, asks, we're interested in how youth's perceived sense of safety impacts their positive youth development. We're interested in how others are measuring it as related to positive youth development. And it is more than just creating a safe physical space. What other aspects are you looking at, and do others have any sort of scale that you can use to share to measure what are some of the outcomes coming out of these safe spaces? Doug?
Great questions. Again, I think it varies in terms of safety. So I'm going to start with it. It's not only the physical safety. I mean, the major issue for young people living in informal settlements, especially during COVID, to be quite honest, is the police and extrajudicial stuff going on. It's pretty intense. So you can, if you've seen some of the media that's come out of specifically the Mathare settlement, informal settlement, where some really nasty stuff has happened. So let's just say that yes, physical is super important for young people, and it's one of the key issues, especially in informal settlements as well as in conflict cities. But I agree with you as well. I mean, there's lots of different layers of feeling safe. Gender obviously is a huge cut. I mean, if young women have a lot more issues around safety, and so have to have programming. Unfortunately, what we found, at least in the East African context, but I've found oftentimes globally, is young men oftentimes have more access or ability to move around. So oftentimes their programming leans towards young men, especially if you kind of leave it just completely open and don't look to empower, engage, and find the spaces young people have. So gender is obviously critical. And I think, we've done a lot of work on youth-friendly and youth-led. I mean, there's a youth-driven, positive. I mean, there's all these phrases, these kind of adjectives you add or before or after youth. Oftentimes for me, it's agency, that young people really feel that this is their space and they have say. They have say in the governance of the space. They have say in what's happening in the space. And that to me adds a whole layer of safety because they feel that they have some control. And I mean, it's kind of a developmental phase. It's, young people are expanding and kind of, I don't know if you read Vygotsky and, and different ways of how young people develop, but you need to create that space where they're allowed to push out and they're allowed to take risks, but within a safe environment. And that to me is critical to the creation of a safe, and we add, if you look at our slide, add the term generative space. So we're not just looking at protecting young people, but we're looking at giving them the ability to kind of go beyond their bounds, but in a safe way.
That's great. There's a great question also here from Lisa Loxman, where she says, what if there's not a quote unquote sense of volunteering in that community? And I think sometimes we confuse, do people call what they do volunteering, or is it just their sense of solidarity in a community? So could any of you three talk a little bit about how you get those people to want to support the youth center? Because we know that youth centers only sustain themselves when they have that level of community collaboration to teach the guitar lesson, the computer lesson, to run the X or Y, Z program. Anyone like to start with that question?
I like to respond to Lisa because, you know, we were asking ourselves the same question. In the US, there's a culture of volunteering. This is not the case in Latin America. So we were afraid, you know, are we going to ask volunteers to come to a center? You know, are they willing actually to give some of their time? So what we did is we just passed a survey in the 3 communities where we were going to open the adult centers. And we asked the people, you know, just would you mind giving some of your time for your youth? And the responses was overwhelming. The response was overwhelming. You know, it's just 97% of the people said yes, you know, and we were asking them just to contribute a few hours a week. And this is how we decided, okay, this is the way to do it. And basically we did it that way because we wanted these centers to be sustainable. We didn't want to be paying trainers. We didn't want to carry the cost of such an expensive operation if we wanted to have it in several communities at the same time. And basically also, you know, the project was running out of funding. So we actually, the first 3 adult centers started with $16,000 each. And that's all we had, you know. So we paid for the salary of the coordinator for the first 3 months and some of the maintenance, and that was it. We were depending on volunteers and depending on the faith-based organizations. And the response was overwhelming. And, you know, just as I said, volunteers are the backbone of the adult centers. And you have volunteers at some of those centers who started at the beginning, when the center started probably 2010, and they are still there, you know, just.
Selena?
I just put it in the chat, but I agree with Harold. I think sometimes it's a new concept, volunteering in our communities. It definitely was here 14 years ago when we started. So I think you don't know what the answer is going to be until you ask. So just asking people, and I think sometimes they're, you know, we've gotten a lot of people tell us, I didn't realize if someone's a plumber, and they've helped even with school infrastructure, whether it's a club or not, just volunteering in general. I think that asking for different kinds of commitment, Mike mentioned this earlier, sometimes people have less time. So asking for, you know, different amounts of time and start people off with something that's lower commitment, just so they get the hang of it, because there's an insecurity around it too. You get nervous about whether you're going to be able to do a good job. So I would say ask people, and once they say yes, just make it easy. Mike mentioned the existing curricula, give flexibility and options. And then once people start doing it and they realize the impact they're having, they get really, really excited about it.
Awesome, thank you. And speaking of just ask, it's amazing how fast 60 minutes goes. But here's our ask for everybody who's on. First of all, thank you to the 90 people from all around the world that said, I care about this issue of making sure every young person is connected to a quality program, a safe space, after school program, youth center in their community. So our call to action for you is download the toolkit. You have access to this PowerPoint. Download this toolkit, explore some of the amazing resources. It's an online toolkit as well, so you can jump to the section you want. You could explore the tools with your partners and share them out with your partners and say, hey, we've been needing a curriculum on digital literacy, or a curriculum on leadership development with young people, or violence prevention. Explore some of those and say, how do we put them in? Or take a step earlier and say, hey, we want to pull together the municipality and some of the CBOs in our community, the faith-based organizations, and we're going to share with them that we've got all the tools and knowledge to do this, but we need to do this collective effort, and we have to figure out who puts in what to like start launching these programs here, or improve upon our existing centers. And then apply those really into your new program and let us know. Our online toolkit is an organic document. As we get great examples, and I know there's a lot of people I've seen in the chat who are running some of these, share them with us. We're glad to add to this. And hopefully you'll join one of the communities of practice on youthpower.org. We've got amazing networks of people working together on these issues. And you can see in here just a few of them. So the all Youth Power members discussion, we have a gender community practice, a youth engagement community practice, a entrepreneurship one on higher education. one on how do we do youth system strengthening, like looking at that whole local system. We have a brand new one that just launched last week for the Middle East and North Africa region in Arabic and English. And then one on how do we measure outcomes around workforce development with youth. So I challenge you and I call on you to like take that next step, explore either of these communities of practice or take a browse through the online toolkit. And I want to really thank Harold and Selena, Doug, Cole and Maria, and all the people at YP2LE who helped make this possible. And thank you guys so much for everybody's commitment to work together with young people and create this continuum of civic action and civic engagement and youth development across our communities. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everybody.